Welcome back, everybody, to the Unfounded podcast. My name is Christopher Turner. I am your host, and this is another episode of the Take Me to Church series that I started here about 3 weeks ago. Thank you for coming back and joining me again, and to kind of fill you in on what we've been talking about over the last 3 weeks. This series is going to cover the entire Bible at the end of it, but right now we're just at the very beginning, right? So if you are somebody who's never read the Bible, who wants to read it directly and make up your own mind about what it means, what it says, or at least what it means to you, this is the place to come for that. We're reading through it very slowly, a chapter or two at a time, and then we're pulling those chapters apart. Because there's so much depth in these texts, using other texts to analyze the Bible through, comparing, contrasting different perspectives from different historical traditions and theological traditions around the world to see what we can pull out, any new insight maybe. And that's really what this whole podcast is about in general. The Unfounded podcast is about asking the questions we often avoid, right? And the question we fail to ask in the context of religion is, do I believe it? Right? And one of the things that you'll get caught in, and especially if you're raised religious in any kind of religious tradition, there's an aspect of the tradition itself that attaches to your ancestors, right? To the people that came before you, your family, your grandma and grandpa, your great-grandma and grandpa, your great-great-great-grandma and grandpa. And so there's a certain amount of, I believe, inbuilt responsibility many of us feel when we are raised in religious structures to believe out of respect for the tradition. Right. Interesting messages coming through right away here. Excuse me. Also a lot of burping, so there's a lot of things that need to be said. A lot of things that need to be said in the world right now that aren't being said, or are being kind of half-truths is what I'm hearing. There's half-truths, a lot of them seeing in the world. I'm seeing these half-truths, actually. So that, to get back on track here, a lot of messages coming through to begin the podcast today. We have to recognize that while honoring our ancestors and upholding tradition, there's a purpose to it. There's a necessity for each of us individually to really understand why those traditions are in place. And the only way you can really do that and believe it is to ask the same questions that the people that came before you asked to establish those truths so that they're carried forward. You have to understand it from that perspective, and the only way to get there is to really question it. So that's what we're doing here. Not in an attempt to disprove anything, not in an attempt to argue against any certain religious perspective, but simply in an attempt to understand better, right? To make up our own minds. I think this is one aspect of religion that's kept it in a lower vibration in the modern world, right? And not even only in the modern world, but historically. That traditionally, most of these religious works, right? These philosophical books even, they were somewhat restricted to the general public, and they were taught to the general public. You were told what to believe because it was filtered through kind of the academics of the time, the people in positions of power, the thought leaders, the Pharisees, right? And these people would give you their interpretation, but state it as if it was fact. And one of the things I experienced as a child was this kind of, what's the right word? The word's failing me right now. Dogma. This is the origin of dogma, I believe. So, with that being said, this morning we are on chapter 8, I believe. Yes. So we've already covered Adam and Eve. We've covered the creation of the world. We've covered the fall, the casting out of Adam and Eve out of Eden. We've covered Cain and Abel and the significance of that. And then we've covered the beginning of God speaking to Noah, commanding him and describing to him how to build the ark, that there's going to be a flood, and then giving him instructions on how to survive this flood, right? So that in chapter 8, we're coming to a point where I believe it's going to talk about what happens after the flood. I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure that's what we're getting to. So this morning I'm going to go ahead and start with reading the Bible, and then I have some other interesting sections to read from our other texts that we were working on last week. We have the book of Enoch here. We also have the secret teachings of all ages that I'm going to be pulling from today. Without further ado, Chapter 8. And God remembered Noah, and every living thing, and all the cattle that was with him in the ark. And God made a wind to pass over the earth, and the waters assuaged. The fountains also of the deep, and the windows of heaven were stopped, and the rain from heaven was restrained. And the waters returned from off the earth continually, and after the end of the 150 days, the waters were abated. And the ark rested in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, upon the mountains of Ararat. Now I'm going to pause here for a second, because there's some interesting developments recently in regards to that very specific passage. So throughout modern history, many archaeologists have been searching for this specific location described in the Bible, the resting place for the ark, because Mount Ararat is an actual place, a historical place, but a place that we can go to today. There is a mountain called Mount Ararat, but I believe there's also a mixing up that's happened from the documentaries I've watched on this. It's been quite a while, but there was a couple different mountain ranges that could possibly be Mount Ararat that's referred to in the Bible here, and that one of these mountains, let me see if I can find it for you here real quick. What mountain do they believe? Let me just type in Noah's Ark found. Let's see if we can find something that way. Ark found. Because archaeologists believe they might have found Noah's Ark. And they've suggested this quite a few years ago, but there's been more research recently that actually kind of confirms some of the beliefs, some of these suggestions that this is could be a man-made object that they've found on the side of this mountain, and that it's approximately the same size as what's described here in the Bible, which is kind of crazy if you think about it, right? The odds of that happening are pretty low, especially with a natural formation. So this one's called, I'm just going to pick the first one off of the search here. This is on arkencounter.com. Let's see what this one has for us. In the past century, dozens of individuals have claimed to have located the Ark. Most of these modern searches have focused on Mount Ararat in eastern Turkey. So that's the mountain that was referred to here in the Bible. But again, I believe, if I remember right, there was a couple different mountains that could have possibly been believed to be Mount Ararat. All right, so this is kind of a cool little site. It's called Ark Encounter, and it has kind of a description here, really kind of aesthetically pleasing. I'll go through it, and I'll leave the links in the show notes if you guys want to look at it yourselves, because it would be kind of good to look at as well instead of listen to. It says, Ararat Anomaly. In 1949, photographs of the northwest side of Mount Ararat were taken by a United States intelligence agency. A large structure can be seen jutting out of the ice and snow. However, the object in the images may be nothing more than a natural rock formation. Ahura George Hagopian claimed that when he was a young boy in 1908, his uncle took him up Mount Ararat to the Ahura Gorge. Hagopian said they found a large ship, and he walked on its roof. At least a dozen expeditions have explored the Ahura Gorge since then, but to date, none of these adventurers have found the remains of Noah's Ark. Dura Pinar Formation. So they're going through kind of all of the possible suggestions of where it could be resting. This arc-shaped formation lies approximately 15 miles from the summit of Mount Ararat. It was popularized by Ron Wyatt, who claimed to have found numerous artifacts in the vicinity to corroborate his claims. Often heralded as the remains of Noah's Ark, the Dura Pinar site appears to be just one of many similar-looking geological formations in the region of Turkey. So this is one of the popular ones that they have argued is just a geological formation. The mountains of Ararat. The Bible does not specify Mount Ararat as the Ark's landing place. Genesis 8:4 states that the Ark came to rest in the mountains of Ararat. Okay, so I guess they're kind of arguing against, this is kind of an interesting way they're stating everything. They're arguing against some of the arguments against the ark being real. So they're bringing up the section we just read. It states in the Bible that it came to rest in the mountains of Ararat. Mount Ararat is a dormant volcano that last erupted in 1840, and many much larger eruptions occurred during the post-flood ice age. How would a wooden structure survive being burned by molten lava? Despite many supposed sightings and evidence from Mount Ararat, it seems unlikely that Noah's Ark has been found in recent times. Other popular Ark sightings. The Bible merely places the Ark on a mountain in the region of Ararat called Ur-2 in ancient times. As such, it is certainly possible that the Ark landed on a mountain other than the Mount Ararat in eastern Turkey. So this is kind of getting into the confusion over where it could actually be. So, let's see, there's another one here. Mount Suleiman, Iran. A military veteran named Ed Davis claimed to have seen the remains of Noah's Ark during World War II while he was stationed in Iran. The site was further popularized by Bob Cornuke of Base Institute in the early 2000s. So there's quite a few different possible arks that have been suggested. Mount Kuti. Several ancient traditions specify Mount Kuti, which is in the region of Ararat, as the resting place of the ark. Stories were told of festivals being held where celebrants would pull pieces off of the ark to use for good luck. There are no known traces of the ark on this mountain today. So, and this is the site, I believe. So Ark Encounter, there is a recreation that has been created. Let's see, where is this at? Plan your visit. So Ark Encounter is a place where you can go and see a recreation of the ark and walk through it, which is pretty cool. It's a full-size recreation of the measurements and the directions that God gave Noah. So somebody recreated that, and you can go visit it. And I'd love to go visit this. It is in, where is this at? Kentucky. It's in Kentucky. So if anybody's interested and wants to go check out the Ark or learn more about it and you're near Kentucky, check out Ark Encounter. It's something I'd love to. I'm just a little bit too far away from there. Hopefully sometime I can get out there. But anyway, so that's kind of, and this is from a more kind of religious source, right? The Ark Encounter is obviously a Christian website. But it did a good job, I thought, there of kind of explaining the different versions of the Ark Encounters that have popped up throughout history and how there is multiple different locations suggested for the possible landing spot of the Ark. And let me see if I can, before we move on here, find the article that I was actually looking for. Ark evidence that I just saw over the last couple months. So this is on Popular Mechanics. It says, archaeologists think they might have found the real Noah's Ark. This was by Tim Newcomb, published November 1st, 2023. Let's read through this here. Archaeologists believe that they have discovered the final location of Noah's Ark on Turkey's Mount Ararat. Soil samples from atop the highest peak in Turkey reveal human activity and marine materials. So that's an interesting discovery there, that they're finding fossils, I believe, at the top, like the peaks of these mountains. I even heard, I believe it was on one of Rogan's podcasts, that they found fossil evidence at very high elevations in some of the Himalayas, even suggesting that at one point parts of the Himalayas were underwater, at least up to the level where they're finding these fossils, right? And this would be over such a long period of time where the continents themselves would have shifted. So there would have been raising, the mountains would have gotten higher as the plates kind of compress and bump against each other. So there would have been changes geologically over this time. It's a large time frame, but still, there is evidence suggesting that there was high level water at some point in Earth's history. Dating of the rock and soil from the location match with biblical timing of Noah's Ark. Researchers from a trio of universities in Turkey and the United States have spent roughly a year analyzing the rock and soil in the famous Durham Pinar Formation on Mount Ararat, the highest mountain in Turkey. They believe that the boat-shaped site may hold the ruins of the legendary Noah's Ark. The biblical account of Noah tells of God instructing Noah to build a giant ark to spare his family and pairs of animals from an impending flood, meant to destroy the evil and wickedness running rampant on the earth. Noah's Ark is said to have come to rest on the mountains of Ararat following a 150-day flood about 5,000 years ago. Researchers now believe they've found evidence of human activity near the boat-shaped formation in the mountains from between 5,500 and 3,000 BC. Farouk Kaye, AICU Vice Rector Professor, says that analyzing rocks and soil from the uniquely shaped area in the mountain shows human activity in the region, timed to the years following the flood in the legend of Noah's Ark. In terms of dating, it is stated that there was life in this region as well, end quote. Kaya says, according to the Daily Mail, quote, "This was revealed in the laboratory results," end quote. Human activity, however, does not a biblical account prove. The Duran-Pinar Formation has been put forth as a potential ark resting place for many years and has received extensive attention from those hoping to find Noah's Ark. Despite the hype, archaeologists have consistently reaffirmed over the years that the formation is natural, but the result of a petrified shipwreck, and that there is no geological record of a global flood like the one described in religious texts. Some believe that a more local flood may have been possible, but that is also debated. The team says it's currently possible to say that Noah's Ark itself was at the Duran-Pinar site. Quote, "With the dating, it is not possible to say that the ship is here," end quote, Farouk Kaya, one of the researchers on the project, said according to Turkish news publication Hürriyet. Quote, "We need to work for a long time to reveal this. In the next period, we agreed to carry out a joint study under the leadership of ITU, Andrew University, and AICU. 3 universities will conduct their work in this field in the future," end quote. For now, the scientists point to the evidence in the soil of clayey materials, marine materials, and seafood, according to Hürriyet, within the geological formation, as evidence. The team of researchers placed a renewed focus on the region in 2021 by exploring varying geological areas, including the Duran-Pinar Formation, which is made of limonite that bears resemblance to a ship like Noah's Ark. Further exploration led the team to take the rock and soil samples from the country's highest peak for laboratory analysis. The story of God, Noah, his family, the animals in his care, and Noah's Ark has caused much debate for centuries. The search for proof of this event will likely continue for some time, and only that time will tell if it is there to be found. Tim Newcomb is a journalist based on the Pacific Northwest. He covers stadiums, sneakers, gear, infrastructure, and more for a variety of publications, including Popular Mechanics. His favorite interviews have included sit-downs with Roger Federer in Switzerland, Kobe Bryant in Los Angeles, and Tinker Hatfield in Portland. All right, well, thank you for that article, Tim. That was interesting. Kind of fills us in on where we are modern day. So there is research being done right now, geological samples being taken and tested, it seems, this was in November of last year, so recently. The most recent reports have shown that these datings might be fairly accurate. Now, the time frame is a little confusing, right? So we have, archaeologically, it's appearing that the Younger Dryas event that you may have heard of at this point from Netflix, I forget what the series is, Graham Hancock's series, Ancient Apocalypse, on Netflix. But if you've watched that, there is debate going on, heated debate in the archaeological community over whether the archaeological record is accurate. A growing number of scientists, led by Graham Hancock, believe that there is significant evidence to show that there was a global catastrophic flood at some point in our past history. When they try to date this, the dating goes back to around 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, and actually suggests that there was multiple floods between that period of time. The source of that would have been, Graham argues, an impact of some sort, a meteor or an asteroid impact occurring in the north of the North Pole, I believe, which would have, during that ice age, almost instantly melted billions of gallons of water or ice into water, raising the global water level drastically in a very short period of time. And through that show, they go through showing not only the kind of historical evidence through like archaeological record that different civilizations have left around, speaking of floods or destruction events, but also geological evidence showing flow patterns from around the world, massive flow patterns that could only have been created with huge amounts of water over very short periods of time. They've even found and suggested a location for Atlantis, which I bring up because we are going to be reading about Atlantis here shortly. So, all of that into context, right? There is some interest in the story of Noah and the flood, modern day, that is starting to glean new insight, and we kind of just have to wait and see how these pieces fit together, because as you can see, the timelines are a little off. This article said that it would have been around 5,500 to 3,000 BC, so this would have been what? Well, about 7,500 years ago. So we're talking about 3,000 to 5,000 year difference in the estimations of the geological timescale between the Younger Dryas impact theory and the Noah's Ark archaeological evidence that's being tested right now. So what I think is going to happen is I believe that one of these dates or both of them are slightly off, and I don't know this for a fact, but I think that they're probably talking about the same event, but that the time frame in one of these descriptions or both of them is slightly off, so that we've separated them throughout history and not realized that these are two different sources for the same event, something like that. Anyway, let's go ahead and keep reading from chapter 8. So line 4, and the ark rested in the 7th month on the 17th day of that month upon the mountains of Ararat. And the waters decreased continually until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the 1st day of that month, were the tops of the mountains seen. And it came to pass at the end of the 40 days that Noah opened the window of the ark which he had made. And he sent forth a raven, which went forth to and fro until the waters were dried up from the earth. Also he sent forth a dove from him, to see if the waters were abated from off the face of the ground. But the dove found no rest for the sole of her foot. And she returned unto him into the ark, for the waters were on the face of the whole earth. Then he put forth his hand and took her and pulled her in unto him into the ark. And he stayed yet another 7 days. And again he set forth the dove out of the ark. And the dove came into him in the 7th, and lo, in her mouth was an olive leaf, plucked off. So Noah knew that the waters were abated from off the earth. Oh, and so let's pause there for a second too, because there's significance with the olive leaf, right? Olive leaf has been a significant symbol throughout history, symbolizing peace or a peace offering, right? So what does this mean here in this section? Well, the dove is often one of the birds, very specific birds, that's meant to represent divinity, right? Specifically 3 doves, right? To represent the Holy Trinity, right? But this animal of grace and beauty. So that it's interesting that Noah releases a raven and he also releases a dove. Now, why does it speak of the raven part? I'm not sure here. I'm actually asking this question right now. And he sent forth a raven which went forth to and fro until the waters were dried up from the earth. Also he sent forth a dove from him to see if the waters were abated from off the face of the ground. So there's some aspect in the differences between a raven and a dove that is important here, right? Because he spends out two different animals, and the raven symbolically is kind of the opposite. It's not the opposite, but it's not. The raven is kind of well, I guess it is an opposite of sorts of the dove. It's meant to represent the underworld. It's meant to represent the things that aren't seen, right? The raven is a messenger, a bringer of messages, and in some ways, I believe, kind of like a holder of the ancient tradition. In some way, like it symbolizes the passing on, the holding of this ancient traditional message. And then the dove, like I just described, has more of this divine quality to it, of like grace itself. So it's almost like Noah sends out 2 different versions of belief into the world. I don't know if that's accurate, but that's kind of what it sounds like as I'm thinking through it. That maybe the raven is meant to represent a certain type of maybe a certain type of balance that's being looked for. Like maybe the raven is searching to make sure that the work is done, right? That this hard work, this nasty work of destroying the world, that the raven is kind of the harbinger of this and watches to make sure that the work is completed in the way that it was intended. So it has this, what's the right word? I want to say harpy for some reason. Quality is what's coming through. But I'm thinking in Nordic tradition right now of the Nordic gods that come down and usher warriors who have died on the battlefield into Valhalla. I can't remember the name of those beings. Anyway, point being that I feel like the raven is meant to represent this old belief in some way, and the dove is meant to represent this new version of it, this new kind of grace being introduced into the world, and it's introduced with an olive branch, right, which ends up being the symbol of grace in our world moving forward, of peace, of good intent, right? And so that's the sign that the waters are done, that the flood is done, is when the dove comes back to Noah and brings an olive branch. And the dove came into him in the evening, and lo, in her mouth was an olive leaf plucked off. So Noah knew that the waters were abated from off the earth. And he stayed yet another 7 days, and sent forth the dove, which returned not again unto him any more. And it came to pass in the 601st year, in the first month, the first day of the month, the waters were dried up from the earth. And Noah removed the covering of the ark, and looked, and behold, the face of the ground was dry. And in the 2nd month, on the 7th and 20th day of the month, was the earth dried. And God spoke unto Noah, saying, Go forth of the ark, thou, and thy wife, and thy sons' wives with thee. Bring forth with thee every living thing that is with thee, of all flesh, both of fowl and of cattle, and of every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth, that they may breed abundantly in the earth, and be fruitful, and multiply upon the earth. And Noah went forth, and his sons, and his wives, and his sons' wives with him, every beast, every creeping thing, and every fowl, and whatsoever creepeth upon the earth, after their kinds, went forth out of the ark. And Noah builded an altar unto the Lord, and took of every clean beast and of every clean fowl, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And the Lord smelled a sweet savor. And the Lord said in his heart, I will not again curse the ground any more for man's sake, for the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I again smite any more every living thing, as I have done. While the earth remaineth, seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease. And that is the end of chapter 8. So I was thinking about something as I was reading that final passage there, that there's another interesting development modern day. Göbekli Tepe is the name of this ancient geological site that's been very popular in recent history in terms of archaeology and in terms of finding out what's happened in our past to ancient civilizations, because Göbekli Tepe is a very old site that they estimate, if I'm not mistaken, dates back to around that Younger Dryas period, about 10,000 years ago or so. And let me see here. Let me find a good article for us. All right, so this is from Popular Archaeology. It says, Echo from the Past, how Göbekli Tepe is reshaping our understanding of the Neolithic. And I'm trying to kind of find an article that will speak about this topic that we're on here, because a lot of archaeology is very secular, right? And this is part of the problem with what Graham Hancock's trying to suggest, is there's a certain story of our history that has been popularized over at least the last 100 to 150 years that has been taught in schools and that experts have spoke about as if it is fact. And we're only now starting to figure out that that might not be the case. And because of that, many of the traditional archaeologists, I believe, are waging a certain type of war intellectually to try to argue against these new theories. And so Graham Hancock has come up against a lot of pushback, so that many of the articles that you're going to find on Göbekli Tepe aren't going to talk about what we are talking about here today. Specifically, one of the suggestions Graham made recently in the latest Joe Rogan episode he was on, that, and I believe it was Graham that was suggesting this, that they believe that Göbekli Tepe, and they don't know this, but because of some of the hieroglyphs that they found, the ancient inscriptions and stuff on the rocks, and the way that this huge complex is designed, it appears that it was designed as a certain type of record, almost like a stone record, because there's depictions on many of the pillars of different astrological alignments, and then also kind of descriptions of events happening during those astrological alignments. I believe it even speaks about floods, if I'm not mistaken, from one of the documentaries I watched. So what that might mean is that Göbekli Tepe, and this is what Graham Hancock kind of suggested, not saying it is, but suggesting that this could be an example of, like, what would you do if you're Noah and you just witnessed the entire human race, everything get wiped out off of the face of the earth, and now you are the only living human being that you can see or believe is still there? What would you do first? You're the last human being, and you're restarting civilization. Well, I think one of the first things you do is try to write down what happened. You try to conserve what happened, right? So that the future generations know what to look for, what to watch for inside of themselves and in the world. Because it might also speak of natural geological shifts, astronomical shifts that cause destruction over periods of time. So that I believe one of the things Göbekli Tepe could be is the landing place for Noah, right? Or at least one of the places where Noah, or figures like Noah, tried to describe what happened in these great floods, what happened in their history. It's the reason they scribbled it into rock, because there was no other way to conserve something that long. We can't even conserve a message for longer than a couple hundred years modern day using the technology we have. We'd have to scribble it in rock like they did to make it last. So when you start to approach it logically that way, it seems like maybe there is evidence of some of these things happening. And that Göbekli Tepe, while it is kind of early days in the suggestion I just made in reference to Göbekli Tepe, that might be the case. It could be a record from maybe a different civilization of the same event, or it could even be an origin for the story of Noah scribbled onto rocks. The main reason they believe that this might be more of a hall of record, a library of sorts, a historical document in stone, is because of the way it's designed. It's a complex that doesn't seem to serve any purpose in any kind of practical purpose, and it was buried intentionally. And they know that because as they've excavated the entire place, they've found that the material that was used to fill in to bury everything was like fill material you'd use that had already been dug out from another place. It was intentionally buried. Whereas if something was buried over time, you'd see a different type of sediment in that place. So that they know from the uniformity of the sediment or from the dirt that they used to bury Göbekli Tepe, that it was most likely buried intentionally. Now, why would you scribe something on rocks and then bury it? Well, one of the only things that can take a message off of a rock is wind and water erosion. So if you bury it, you eliminate that issue, right? All of these pieces start to fit together pretty well when you start to think about it, or you start to open your mind up a little bit to considering both the Bible and religious texts as historical documents as well as archaeological evidence. They fit together. And isn't that fascinating? Not perfectly, but that's what our job is here as human beings, is to figure out why it doesn't fit perfectly right now. What pieces are we missing? Right? Are our timelines off in one or the other, or both? You know, what are we not seeing? So, there's what's so important about Noah is this is letting us know that one, human beings are flawed inherently. They're so flawed inherently that they have destroyed the world essentially already before, right? That they've degraded to a point where it was necessary that there was a restart, there was a reset, right? Imagine it as if you're playing a video game and you get so far in the video game that it degrades so much, you make too many wrong choices that you can't actually finish the game. So that it's actually necessary now. You've saved over a save where you can't progress, right? Something like that. So now you have to restart the game. That's kind of what happened here with the story of Noah's Ark. Is God looked at the world and said, "There's been things that have happened." We can talk about the fall of the angels, right? The angels coming down, sleeping with human women, the Nephilim, that were out of control, out of the plans. We saved over a save we needed, right? So now I can't reverse that. The only way to stop this development, this progression, is to restart it. And so Noah's flood is essentially restarting the video game, right? But from God's perspective. And at the same time, he's not restarting it completely fresh. He's not making a new video game, because that would be deleting everything. He's saving the bones of the game, right? The fundamental code, and he's redoing kind of he's seeing if the fundamental rules or the fundamental code works still. If you reset it and you maybe do something different, which I don't know what that would be. If you reset it and you do something different, then maybe it'll work this time. That's what's coming through right now from like a divine perspective, is that the flood was a test. This has all been an experiment, and that the experiment has failed at least one time before, and that the flood was an attempt to reset the experiment to try again, right? We're going to go on chapter 9 as well. And God blessed Noah and his sons and said unto them, "Be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth." And so just in that, you can kind of see part of the intention was to get the bloodline back to what it was intended to be. Because whatever happened with the Watchers sleeping with human women and creating Nephilim ruined whatever plans were in place for the development of this species. It, at the very least, complicated it, so that one of the fundamental things God is trying to do here by saving Noah is he's trying to say, the characteristics of this figure specifically, and the figures that stem from him, are the closest to what I intended that still exists today. So that if I want to try this experiment again, I start with that thing and try to multiply from there. I try to reproduce from there. And maybe I can create something that's more resilient in that process. That's the way I would look at it from a higher perspective. And the fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth, and upon every fowl of the air, upon all that moveth upon the earth, and upon all the fishes of the sea, and into your hand are they delivered. Every moving thing that liveth shall be meat for you, even as the green herb have I given you all things. But flesh with the life thereof, which is the blood thereof, shall ye not eat. And surely your blood of your lives will I require. At the end of every beast will I require it. At the hand of man, at the hand of every man's brother, I will require the life of man. That's an interesting passage. Let's break that down more. This is line 5 in chapter 9 on page 15, Genesis. And surely your blood of your lives will I require. At the end of every beast will I require it. And at the hand of man, at the hand of every man's brother, will I require the life of man. That seems to be speaking about Cain and Abel in some way, but I don't exactly know what that passage means. It just seems very significant right now. If any of you have comments on any of these sections as I'm going through it, ideas that I'm not speaking of, things that pop up, leave them in the comments. There's a comment section on Spotify and most of the podcast platforms, whatever you use to listen to me on, there's usually a comment section. Leave me a comment. It helps get the engagement up on the podcast, and also it can help us figure out what some of these things mean, because I don't know what all of this means. I'm reading along with you. I'm trying to figure it out. So it could be helpful to start the conversation, right? Whoso sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. And that is kind of the same. It's not the same curse as Cain. Because in Cain, it's something weird. When Cain murders Abel, God tells Cain that you are going to have to wander the earth kind of the rest of your existence and your kin. So not just you, but your whole bloodline is going to have to wander the earth kind of constantly at threat from the beast and the fowl and the people, other people and things. And Cain kind of speaks to God like, yeah, but they're going to all murder me. And then God says, I will place a mark on you, and if anybody touches you, they will experience whatever they've done sevenfold, right? So God's doing something very confusing there. He's saying, I'm punishing you, but also you're still mine. I still love you in some way, maybe. I still don't want you to be destroyed. While there's a punishment that's innate in what you've done, I don't want you done. What you hear here in Genesis chapter 9, line 6, whoso sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of God made he man. So what is this saying? God made man in his own image, gave it something that is divine, so that if another divine thing develops the audacity to believe in whatever justification they've come up with, that they have the right or the ability, even if they don't believe they have the right, but the ability, and they act on that to take another man's life, another human's life, then they are karmically inviting the exact same thing to happen to them. It's a way in which the curse of Cain is being passed down, I guess is the way you could view it, right? So that if you make the same mortal mistake that Cain made, you have a similar curse placed upon you. But there's a difference in it, because this speaks of equality. This speaks of, if you shed somebody's blood, your blood will be shed. So it's an eye for an eye. It's kind of a beginning of the eye for an eye law that you see in ancient Jewish tradition, right? But that's not what God speaks of in Cain. And this is where some of the confusion, this is where some of the stories might be combined, different stories over time, and they don't exactly match up perfectly every time. And the differences are important, because this is maybe some place, an area where we have misunderstood the teaching. Something as divine as God wouldn't be hypocritical, right? It has total foresight, so it knows everything. So if it's saying something in a specific way, it's saying it for a reason. It's trying to highlight something. And if it's saying the same thing two different ways, closely spaced apart in a story, it's trying to highlight something. The gap between those two, what's the difference? Well, maybe one of the problems with the original world was the curse that was bestowed upon Cain, right? Maybe in this, God is taking some responsibility. For as I cursed Cain, whoever so hurts you shall be hurt sevenfold, or whatever the actual line is, the quote. To whoever sheds man's blood, their blood will be shed. It seems like an adjustment that God is making in his creation, recognizing that maybe part of the reason the world devolved to a place it was because of that original curse, right? So that you can imagine if one of the original beings of creation murders its brother and then is cursed perpetually for that, but that is the main patriarch of the new developing society and civilization, then a majority of the people that are going forward in that civilization are going to have similar characteristics, similar ancestral debt, and may act on the same thing that their predecessor acted on. This is how ancestral debt works, unless they're able to see it first. But if you have the punishment be sevenfold, there's a certain type of weight that entails that it almost encourages. It's very similar to the punishment that you see in Paradise Lost, right? It's very close to, I'm done with you forever. It's not forever, you're gonna be punished worse, sevenfold, versus what was done to you, but it is a lot closer to forever. It's a crushing weight. And I think that could cause a being to turn away from divinity itself and start to work for whatever the negative thing is. We call it Lucifer, or Satan, or the devil, because the devil can use that as kind of an attack against the divine one, saying, look, it doesn't care for you. Look at how severely it will punish you when you make one mistake, right? So that it makes much more sense strategically with your creation to say, if you hurt somebody in this way, you will be hurt in the same way. There's a certain amount of innate fairness and equality built into that demands that you treat people the right way. This is a gestation of the 10 Commandments. Treat others like you want to be treated, right? You're seeing a gestation of the ideas. Isn't that interesting? I love that part. Whoso sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of God made he man. So when you kill another man, you are killing God. I can feel that. Can you feel that? That vibration all over your body when I say that? The tingling, the hair stands on your arms. That's God. That's your angels. It's whatever you believe in, confirming for you that is true. When you kill somebody, you kill God. It's an extrapolation of the sin that Lucifer made. The mistake that all of the fallen angels made, which is why you can see their fingerprint on it, their influence in those actions. Because it's an audacity that is only exemplified through the story of the fall of Lucifer. This seems really, I want to kind of pause here for a second because this seems really important based on what's going on in the world right now. One of the most popular stories right now is a tragic one. And what's even more tragic and kind of disturbing is the response that you're seeing in the world. Because you're seeing an example of the degradation, the fingerprints of these evil things in individual people and their perspective, right? But that the United Healthcare CEO over the week, or the last couple of days, I think it was 2 days ago, early in the morning, about 6 a.m. in New York City, was going to a conference of some sort with other business leaders. And while he's walking into this conference, a man in a hoodie, black hoodie, face concealed, walks up behind him. There's video of this, which is absolutely horrifying, with a pistol and a silencer, and shoots the gentleman in the back and in the leg, and then runs off. And later the gentleman died. Find his name real quick. Just out of respect, so I don't remember his name. No, I don't want SEO. I want CEO, please. Thank you. It's really hard to find his name for some reason, which is kind of interesting. Brian Thompson. Yeah, so Brian Thompson is the gentleman that was very tragically murdered a couple days ago. And one of the things the reason I bring it up is because I think you can see the fingerprints of these deceptive things on the perspective and the popular conversation that's come out since then. There's been a lot of frustration brewing in the populace over the last 50 to 100 years, directed specifically towards people and individuals in positions of extreme wealth and power. Regardless of what industry they're at the head of or what political movement they're at the head of, there's been a growing resentment for the bourgeois class, is the best way I could describe it. And I'm not speaking the reason I use that word is because I believe this is an extension and a growth of the communist mindset inside of the United States. But that we have started to identify anybody who holds a position of power and has a lot of money as a member of a certain class. In the early 1900s, it would have been referred to as the bourgeois class, or the class that has everything, right? The class that has the ability to affect society directly, power, influence, and money, and uses that in a very tyrannical way. This is the idea. We're starting to revitalize this idea of the bourgeoisie in modern America, and we're applying it towards healthcare CEOs, oil magnates, even depending on what your political views are, people are starting to apply this to figures like Elon Musk, Bill Gates, like all of these people that have done big things. And as I name off all of these names, many of these people I'm sure have done horrible things at some point in their life. They're human beings. right? And specifically, figures like Brian, who are heads of health insurance companies, have done, from what we're starting to learn, some really horrible things and betrayed the trust of the American people. And none of that is okay. They have affected lives very directly, thousands, maybe even millions of lives over time, and all with the intention of making money. Right? Now, these are very low motivations. It's an example of how low our society has fallen in terms of what we think is good in the world, what we'll work for. And it's degraded so much that we will work for some of the biggest companies in our society will work to take advantage of people who are sick, who are the weakest in our society. So that there's a lot of resentment, anger that is built over the last, at least, like I said, couple decades, if not more. And it came to a culmination with this event where this vigilante killer goes and murders one of the CEOs of one of these companies in an attempt to be a Robin Hood of sorts, right? To be a hero of that story and to bring justice when the justice system is failing. But what I find disturbing in that is the quiet rejoicing. It's like a subtle rejoicing that people are doing where they know that they can't say, I like what he did, but they also like what he did. And they're wondering why they're feeling happy over somebody being hurt, murdered, right? I see this all over the world right now. And you're right, if you are feeling that and you're questioning that, good, because you should be. That is a demon. I can promise you that. Anything that will try to twist something negative into a positive and make you feel good when somebody else is hurt, when God is hurt, like we just read, that's evil. It wants to turn you into the same thing. And as you start to justify that man's actions for what he did to Brian, right, you will justify yourself doing the same thing to whoever's hurt you the most. And if you keep playing with that ideal, you'll end up justifying it so much that you'll do it. And then you're too gone. Then that thing has you forever. Right? Or at least it'll make you think it's forever. It is a tragedy. It's a shame that I have to say that out loud. It is a tragedy that a man lost his life, that children lost their father, that a wife lost her husband, regardless of the things that man has done in his life. God is the one that determines what punishment is just and righteous. We don't take that into our own hands. And as soon as we start to justify taking that into our own hands, we become the same thing. We become a murderer. We become Cain again. You start to see why that story is so important? Cain is alive and well in the world, inside of all of us. Is still trying to justify what he did to Abel. Isn't that just a story of the Cain and Abel? That man's got everything, and he's done it because he hasn't done it the right way. Why? Because I don't have anything, and I've done it the right way. So you know what? I'm going to make sure that the world, the universe, everybody knows that that person doesn't deserve what they have, and I'm going to take their life because of it. That is Cain. So, if you are somebody that is feeling how deeply that story goes inside of each of us individually, then you're doing the right thing. You're analyzing it properly. You're feeling what it actually makes you feel. Because I'm not sitting here trying to preach to you. I feel the same things. That's why I'm able to describe them. The first time I saw that story about Brian, I could feel that nasty thing inside of me. The thing that has watched me be hurt by other people, being taken advantage of. And it used all of those things, gathered them all up in that moment and said, look, tried to convince me that's justice. Look, he got what he deserved. That's justice. But if you stop that thing for 1 second and say, is that really justice? Or is that revenge? That thing shuts the fuck up real quick. It gets scared, actually, because it realizes it's been found out. Right. We each individually need to look at that thing inside of us, that Cain spirit, stare it in the eyes, call it a coward, and tell it to fuck off. Because that's what it is. And that's what it'll do. Because it knows what it is. It just tried to trick you. St. Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. And do thou, O Prince of Heavenly Hosts, cast into hell Satan and all evil spirits who prowl the world seeking the ruin of souls. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For the kingdom, the power, and the glory are yours, now and forever. Amen. I hope you could feel that. And I hope you heard those words in a different way now. What they mean, why they're powerful. Because they are talking directly to that thing I was just describing inside of all of us. It's the sequence of utterances that makes those things cower, those words. Makes them terrified because it's the truth embodied and repeated over time. Let's continue reading. And you, be ye fruitful and multiply. Bring forth abundantly in the earth, and multiply therein. And God spake unto Noah and to his sons with him, saying, And I, behold, I establish my covenant with you, and with your seed after you, and with every living creature that is with you, of the fowl, of the cattle, and of every beast of the earth with you, from all that go out of the ark, to every beast of the earth. And I will establish my covenant with you. Neither shall all flesh be cut off any more by the waters of a flood, neither shall there be any more flood to destroy the earth. And God said, This is the token of the covenant which I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for perpetual generations. So this is a deal that God is making. Right. So I think we are onto something here with what we're postulating, what I've been postulating about why God is making these subtle changes. Why God says if you kill a man, you will, you will, if you draw blood from another man, your blood will be drawn from you. Right? This eye for an eye idea. It's implemented in chapter 9 of Genesis. Before that, it was a different, more punishing version of it. Why is God doing that? Right? Because God's trying to fix the creation. God is taking responsibility for the part that it played in creating this thing. So that even though there was things that happened outside of its control, it's trying to reset the rules so that the machine operates properly. So the creation is actually alive. And so this is one of the first times you hear the word covenant used in the Bible, but you're going to see it repeated. This is a theme that pops out of the Bible, where when God speaks to people directly, whether it's one of the sages throughout history or one of the prophets or any of these people that bring the message of God, there's a certain covenant between those people that's made, but also very specifically in the story of the Jewish people, the covenant is a deal that God makes. Right? There's a certain type of protection that God offers. As long as you follow this fundamental law, right? These fundamental things that I've outlined for you, you are protected perpetually. I will not let this happen again. Right? Maybe that's part of the deal. Maybe that's part of why everything fell apart, is because the punishment from the fall was so severe that these negative entities were able to influence and take over. Essentially, imagine you're mad at your father or your mother for punishing you, and then somebody comes in and says, yeah, they were completely wrong for everything they did, and you should just go do this instead. You might be more influenced then, because you already have kind of a questioning in your mind. I think that's what happened here, and you can kind of see that in the story of Paradise Lost, where that's kind of what the demons strategize, is like, hey, like God likes this new creation. He's trying to reset things, it looks like. You know what I mean? So what if we go and just kind of screw that up? You know what I mean? In whatever way we can, we just kind of sneak in there and do this, or trick them into thinking we're God instead, and then we make them do really horrible things, thinking they're praying to God. You know what I mean? And then we just get them further and further away from actual God until the world just is nothing but evil. God doesn't want that to happen again. So these subtle changes are an attempt to stop that from happening again. And God's making a deal with Noah and everybody that comes after Noah. Obey these rules, not because I want to be a forceful God. Practically, I'm trying to help you. I'm trying to solve this problem. Please obey these rules. You are protected when that happens. Automatically, nothing will happen, right? And I will remember my covenant. And this is where it gets so much deeper, because this is the Old Testament we're reading from, right? But when you get to the New Testament and you get to the crucifixion of Jesus, you start to understand, we have to start to pull apart this idea of the covenant, because the covenant was all, you could argue that the purpose of the covenant was to usher in the chosen one, or the Lamb of God, right? The Son of God. But that the Son of God, it was obviously necessary for a sacrifice, so that one of the things you see in the Garden of Gethsemane, the night before Jesus is crucified, he cries tears of blood. He's scared. He knows what's going to happen, and he's begging God, please, is there any other way? Essentially, he's calling on this covenant. Lord, I have done nothing wrong. Is there any other way? Please don't break this covenant with me. So that in order for Jesus to be crucified, God had to break this covenant. God had to allow, but he broke it with his Son, the thing that was closest to him. So that if he has to do it, he's going to do it in a way that he feels it. And it's for a greater purpose. Another saving of the world as it's devolved, right? A different version of the flood, whereas Jesus is the salvation this time. Jesus is the dove bringing the olive branch, but he's being represented on the cross. But you can see in that pleading before, it's one of the most emotional parts of the Bible, because you can feel it. If you want to tap into it, you can feel it in a moment like I just did. The level of terror you would feel to know that you're not only going to suffer, but that it's what God intends. Oh my God. And that you're still supposed to hold yourself together. That's why it speaks of, and Jesus descended into hell. Because nobody can withstand the torments that come when you are experiencing that kind of punishment, especially if you don't deserve it. So that all of the reasonings that the demons are going to throw at you while you're in that pain are going to be justified. They're going to look right. Why would your God do this to you? Isn't it just a vengeful, painful, mean thing? Don't you hate your Father for doing this to you? Can you imagine the things going through Jesus' head as he's laying on that cross, bleeding and suffering? Which is why one of the final things Jesus says is he looks up to the sky right before he's about to take his last breath, and he screams, God, why have you forsaken me? The weight of this world, whatever it is, the characteristics of it are so heavy that even God's Son, the closest thing to God itself in human form, could be disconnected from God. In that moment, Jesus didn't feel God anymore. Can you imagine that hurt? It's profound. So I think this is one of the reasons why the covenant is so important in the story of the Bible. Remember the covenant, the deal God is making with you, right? That is a deal that God only ever broke for one reason, and it was to reset the world again. And I will remember my covenant, which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh. And the waters shall no more become a flood to destroy all flesh. And the bow shall be in the cloud. and I will look upon it, and the bow, shall be in the cloud, and I will look upon it, that I may remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is upon the earth. And God said unto Noah, This is the token of the covenant, which I have established between me and all flesh that is upon the earth. Give me 1 second, guys. I need to clean myself up here. All right, much better. And I will remember my covenant, which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh, and the waters shall be no more. And God said unto Noah, This is the token of the covenant, which I have established between me and all flesh that is upon the earth. And the sons of Noah that went forth of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham is the father of Canaan. These are the 3 sons of Noah, and of them was the whole earth overspread. And Noah began to be an husbandman, and he planted a vineyard. And he drank of the wine, and was drunken, and he was uncovered within his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father, and told his 2 brethren without. And Shem and Japheth took a garment, and laid it upon both their shoulders, and went backward, and covered the nakedness of their father. And their faces were backward, and they saw not their father's nakedness. And Noah awoke from his wine, and knew what his younger son had done unto him. And he said, Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be unto his brethren. And he said, Blessed be the Lord God of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant. God shall enlarge Japheth, he shall dwell in the tents of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant. And Noah lived after the flood 350 years. And all the days of Noah were 950 years, and he died. That's the end of chapter 9. So this ending of chapter 9 is very interesting. It's an abrupt shift. We're going through the ending of the floods, right? And then all of a sudden you get transported to this scene where Noah's now made a vineyard. So the first thing he does is he makes kind of a farm in a vineyard, and starts to make wine, and Noah gets drunk, right? So Noah's drinking the wine, and Noah gets drunk, and he has his 3 sons. He has Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And which one was it? So Ham goes in, finds Noah drunk and naked in his tent, right? And instead of covering up his father, right? This is kind of a very symbolic story, right? It is an extension, I think, of Cain and Abel, which is why it's Canaan that he says his father of Canaan saw the nakedness. So there's something there's a disrespect or a lack of respect for the figure of the father. And it's kind of muddied in here, but essentially what it seems like happened is Ham goes in, sees his father naked, and instead of covering his father himself, making sure that he isn't embarrassed, the patriarch isn't demoralized. Instead, he goes to his brothers and says, Hey, Dad's really drunk and naked. Kind of, and that's the way I imagine it, is the reason that he's punishing him is because he doesn't have a respect there for his father. Instead, he has a certain type of, Cain-like spirit where it's why does he have everything? I should be the leader. So it's another realization of Cain, but in a less tragic form, right? And so then Japheth and Shem were like, dude, that's not cool. We're going to go cover up Dad. And to show respect, they walk in backwards. They cover themselves. They walk in backwards so they can't see their father, and they lay the blanket on top of him and cover him out of respect so that they aren't seeing him in a lower light, right? This is meant to, I think, be kind of an example of the ways in which we are supposed to act towards our own individual fathers, but also towards the highest Father, right? God itself. is that there's a certain type of vulnerability in these stories. There's a nakedness in some of these stories. Maybe what we're doing here as we're reading through this, I'm getting, is like as we're trying to identify why God has changed somewhat in the way he deals with his creation throughout history, there's a nakedness that entails. Whereas if I change something, there is something that didn't go right. This actually suggests that even though God is all-powerful, it can make mistakes. Which is a suggestion that if you were even to utter in most churches would probably be considered heretical, right? But just the simple idea that maybe God, while it is much more powerful than any being we could ever imagine, it's outside our capacity to even understand, maybe some of that capacity is still limited in some way. Maybe there's something that God doesn't have totality over. We don't know what that is, but it's got to be some kind of, well, maybe here's what it is. This is just a suggestion, but this is where my mind's going, right? You have the scene in Genesis with in the Garden of Eden when God creates Adam, and he tells him, hey, this is the piece of me that you have. I give you a piece of me. I created you in my image. You have speech. I want you to name all of these animals, all of these things I've created. I want you to name them, not me. And why is God doing that? I think it's because God's showing you that is the literal thing that I gave you that is me, speech. Think about it. What sets us apart from other animals, right? They may have forms of language, but the kind of speech that we have where it's interchangeable, different dialects, it develops over time, and you can learn how to use different versions of it to communicate there's a capacity there that's leaps and bounds above anything else that we compare it to. So that it kind of makes sense. That is the most divine aspect of the human being to some degree, is their ability to speak things into being, to describe them, to orient them in the world, and then to change the world because of it, right? This is literally how we change the world, is through our speech. And that is embodied in the first 3 or 4 chapters of Genesis, or described in Genesis, so that once God made something that is also part of him, there is a part of him that is no longer under his control. This is free will, right? So that now God has to strategize. God's limited itself by creating us. Oh, wow. Maybe that's what it is. The only way creation comes into being is through limitation. God has to limit itself to create something besides itself. Has to divide itself in half at the very least, right? Because it is totality. So how do you get to 2 if you only have 1? Have it, right? So that's, I think if you just extrapolate that out, gradually you get to a point where you no longer have control over something. So now you have to strategize. Now you have to develop different ways to deal with it. And if you've never done that before, there's a learning process that entails that I think we're starting to see in the Bible. And it actually starts very quickly. So within the first 14 pages of the Bible, you see God learning 2 different lessons. Wow, right? But because we have this reverence for the deity, it's so much higher than us conceptually, we don't question that. We don't even, we feel inside that there's something bad about even suggesting that God could be limited. If you're saying that out loud, or if you're thinking that out loud, that's the part of God that God gave you. That's God speaking. Isn't that ironic? You know what I mean? How does that work? Anyway. So, it now extends from God doling out curses to Noah doling out curses. Why? Because Noah's the patriarch. Who does God say, uphold these rules and you are protected? Noah, you're responsible for this. So if you don't do something, I will have to again, right? I'll have to wipe the whole world off the face of the planet. So obey the rules. Make sure your sons obey the rules. If they don't obey the rules, you deal out the punishment. Make sure it doesn't happen again. And so that's what Noah does. And when he sees that one of his sons aren't being faithful to him, he deals out a very harsh punishment. It's not just on him, it's on his entire lineage. And why is it his whole lineage? Because he's recognizing it's not his son talking, it's Cain. See? It's that specific demon. And it wants the whole family line. And it wants to degrade this whole system. So it's trying to infiltrate the one place where it could restart. Right? Don't you think if God destroyed everything and got it all down to one family, that if there's a bunch of demons that want to take over that creation, they might attack that family? You know what I mean? Which is precisely what happened. So Noah says, no, Ham, you've made a mistake, and your entire lineage now is going to be a mistake in that sense. Why? Because you chose to because you are allowing the spirit of Cain to dwell as the ruler of you. You are separated from God inherently, right? And whatever you're praying to is not God. It's interesting. If you look up, we'll do some more research into it, but the history of the Canaanites, if I'm not mistaken, is the same region which the Jews, when they fled the Egyptians, came to when they got to modern-day Israel. Right? There was a group of people that lived there. If I'm not mistaken, it was the Canaanites. Interesting, isn't it? So, it gives you an explanation for some of the things that are happening modern day. Again, I'm not trying to get on either side of these modern battles in this episode, but I will tell you that I think the Bible has an opinion. I think a lot of the religious texts have opinions, and they're not just they're pretty well founded. They're supported with what I just described, right? So that being said, I'm going to move on a little bit because I have some other things I want to pull from today. I found some interesting passages speaking on Noah and the floods and all of that from the book of Enoch, and then also the Secret Teachings of All Ages by Manly P. Hall. Let's see, where was I at in this one? So, you know what, before we go here, I want to read, because this is actually one that I wanted to read last week, and I forgot about it. But I had a section open that I forgot to cover in last week's episode, and it's from the book of Enoch, and it was more of an intuitive pull. But I feel that this is important to read for some reason right now, and the page marker I used was a tarot card. It's the Two of Cups. I didn't know which card it was when I just drew it intuitively. And just to describe you the card, if it's significant to you or if it's relevant, feels relevant. The Two of Cups is meant to symbolize, cups usually represents emotions of some sort, right? And the Two of Cups is meant to represent kind of partnership, right? So emotional partnership to a certain degree, but coming together, finding a union with a certain idea or even a person could be as well, or a certain feeling that brings you, I hear enlightenment, peace, a certain type of peace, but it's a higher level of perspective, right? So a combining of these views, gestation of sorts, but then out of the middle of these two cups in this depiction, there's two people standing facing each other, a man and a woman. They're both holding cups and they're both reaching out towards each other. And in the middle is the, oh, that's interesting. So what's the symbol, name of the symbol? It's usually used to show like the medical field, but it's the twin snakes wrapping around a central pole. It's a double helix form. Many believe is meant to symbolize the double helix of our DNA, right? The form that our DNA takes, that's what it looks like. But there's two snakes spiraling up a pole, and then at the very top is a lion with wings. I can't remember the name of that mythological figure. And he's very menacing almost. Not menacing, but he's confident and stern, and he's looking out through the card at you. I think what this is meant to represent, for any of you listening right now, in the context of you and me, this is meant to represent that whatever we are talking about right now and the subjects we are on, there's a certain unity of a higher level understanding. As we're bringing these ideas together, talking about them in a way that's honest and curious, honestly curious, there's a new insight that is powerful coming through that. And this is a process that can be practiced in every relationship throughout your life. That's what's coming through for you. Anyway, I hope that helps. This is on page 18. It's in the book of Enoch the Prophet by R.H. Charles. And this is a bunch of Roman numerals. I don't know what number that is. What would that be? 21 through 37? Oh, wow. I guess I can read Roman numerals. The second journey of Enoch. So this is a middle story in the story of Enoch. But this is about the place of punishment where the fallen angels live, right? And I thought this was interesting because of the story of Paradise Lost. 11. Preliminary and final place of punishment of the fallen angels. And then it says in parentheses there, stars. There's more depth to that too that we've gotten into other episodes we'll go into later, I'm sure. But stars are very significant as a symbol, right? Specifically, the morning star has been a very specific symbol, significant throughout history. 11. And I proceeded to where things were chaotic, and I saw there something horrible. I saw neither a heaven above nor a firmly founded earth, but a place chaotic and horrible. And there I saw 7 stars of the heaven bound together in it, like great mountains and burning with fire. Then I said, for what sin are they bound, and on what account have they been cast in hither? Then said Uriel, one of the holy angels, who was with me and was chief over them, and said, Enoch, why dost thou ask, and why art thou eager for the truth? These are of the number of the stars of heaven, which have transgressed the commandment of the Lord, and are bound here till 10,000 years. Oh, that's interesting. So there is a time frame he's given. The time entailed by their sins are consummated. So this isn't forever in this version of the story. Interesting. That's a big change. And from thence I went to another place, which was still more horrible than the foremost. So maybe God's intention was never to make this a permanent thing. So even the punishment that God deals out on the fallen angels and Lucifer may have not been intended to be permanent. Maybe their choices after the fact, described in Paradise Lost, are the reason why it's become permanent. And from thence I went to another place. Maybe there was salvation for them. But the only way to reach salvation is to really forgive yourself and whatever you were angry at. And so if you decide to double down once you've been cast out of grace, what you become is a worse version of whatever you were before. You fall deeper into the pit, so that now you're further from God, and how can I save you from something that you're creating? Right? Then you'll blame me as if I'm punishing you. And from thence I went to another place, which was still more horrible than the former. And I saw a horrible thing, a great fire there which burnt and blazed, and the place was cleft as far as the abyss, being full of great descending columns of fire. Neither its extent or magnitude could I see, nor could I conjecture. Then I said, how fearful is the place, and how terrible to look upon. Then Uriel answered me, one of the holy angels who was with me, and said unto me, Enoch, why hast thou such fear and affright? And I answered, because of this fearful place, because of the spectacle of the pain. And he said unto me, this place is the prison of the angels, and here they will be imprisoned forever. So maybe when it speaks of the imprisonment forever, that isn't necessarily an intention, but something being chosen by those things over and over again through their action and the way they try to torment the other creations of God. Oh man, it's a more beautiful message, and it's more intellectually consistent. God doesn't punish some things harsher than others. It's really complicated to try to explain. It makes much more sense if God didn't intend to punish those things forever. If those things that were so audacious they would try to cast God out of favor initially, also were so audacious that they would refuse to admit they had done something wrong. So that if you punish them, they go deeper. A lot of insight this morning. Wow. This is on page 19. And this is Sheol, or the underworld. And thence I went to another place, and he showed me in the west another great and high mountain, and of hard rock. And there was in it 4 hollow places, deep and wide and very smooth. How smooth are the hollow places, and deep and dark to look at. Then Raphael answered, one of the holy angels who was with me, and said unto me, These hollow places have been created for this very purpose, that the spirits of the souls of the dead should assemble therein, yea, that all the souls of the children of men should assemble here. And these places have been made to receive them till the day of their judgment, until their appointed period, till the period appointed till the great judgment comes upon them. And I saw the spirits of the children of men who were dead, and their voice went forth to heaven and made suit. And I asked Raphael, the angel who was with me, and I said unto him, The spirit, whose is it whose voice goeth forth and maketh suit? And he answered me, saying, Listen to this. This is the spirit which went forth from Abel, whom his brother Cain slew. And he makes his suit against him, till his seed is destroyed from the face of the earth, and his seed is annihilated from amongst the seed of men. So what is Enoch describing there? He goes into the underworld. He sees the places where men's souls go while they're waiting judgment. This is, again, a long time ago. So you have to think that this is before Jesus. So there's an idea that maybe the salvation has already happened to a certain degree as well, that those places aren't the same anymore. But that in this period of time, the Old Testament time, as Enoch is seeing the underworld, he's hearing a voice cry out to God, please. You don't know, he doesn't say exactly what he's saying, but he's crying to God, out of, please help me, do this. Wait, this was unfair, whatever you want to imagine. And he asks, Raphael, who's this talking? Who is this person that's down here saying all these things? And he's saying, it's the spirit of Abel. Remember the guy that was killed the very first time? Well, he got here too. He ended up here just like everybody else, except he did nothing wrong. And now he's waiting perpetually to be judged for something that he didn't do. And so he's crying out to God, please, Lord, do something, make this right. But maybe in that it's also trying to explain to us that even Abel, that there's a depth when evil is done to someone that's deeper than the physical. It's a soul level pain, right? That is exemplified in this story here. Whereas Abel was slain by his brother, it creates a hatred inside of you for what was taken from you. And then it makes you want to gain what you will convince yourself is justice, but what is actually revenge against that person. Kind of fits nicely with the story of, the United Healthcare CEO and why that's so tragic. Because it is, and this is being confirmed right now very blatantly here for anybody listening, the spirit of Cain alive and well in the modern world. You watched it on TV the last 2 days. So if you need an example of how this stuff is real in your life, that's it. Watch how you're reacting to that story and make sure that you are not justifying it and degrading yourself and the whole world and other human beings in the process. I know it's happening because I've felt it and I've been fighting myself very intentionally over the last couple of days against that specifically. So I know other people are too. And if we are being intuitively guided to read these different sections from different books and it's all speaking about Cain, I think that's what we're supposed to be focusing on right now. Then I asked regarding it and regarding all the hollow places, why is one separated from the other? And he answered me, and he said unto me, these 3 have been made that the spirits of the dead might be separated. And such a division has been made for the spirits of the righteous, in which there is the bright spring of water. And such has been made for sinners when they die and are buried in the earth, and judgment has not been executed on them in their lifetime. Here their spirits shall be set apart in this great pain till the great day of judgment, and punishment, and torment of those who curse forever, and retribution for their spirits. There he shall bind them forever, and such a division has been made for the spirits of those who make their suit. who make disclosures concerning their destruction, when they were slain in the days of the sinners. Such has been made for the spirits of men who were not righteous but sinners, who were complete in transgression, and of the transgressors they shall be companions. But their spirits shall not be slain in the day of judgment, nor shall they be raised from thence. Then I blessed the Lord of glory and said, Blessed be my Lord, the Lord of righteousness, who ruleth forever. You reap what you sow. This is an introduction, or this is another example of you reap what you sow. Enoch is describing the underworld and where people go after they've passed away, where their spirits and souls go. And one of the punishments that's being described there is for people who live unrighteous lives, who take advantage of other people, who lie, who cheat, who steal, who do all these other things. Enoch's asking, what is that place like here for them? Like, what do they get here? And Angel basically says they get what they sowed. They get to hang out with all of the other people that did the same thing, and only that, forever. You reap what you sow, right? So that when the day of salvation comes and you see the individuals who maybe did some bad in their life, but also opened themselves up to the grace of God to any degree, being raised back to a place of paradise, you have to watch that and know that you are going to be here with what you made forever. The forever part is the only part that I am debating right now, because it seems like the forever part, I don't know if that's a thing that God does. Again, I think this is an experiment. So forever is kind of, depends on the amount of time you're talking about, right? In our context, forever could be 1,000 years, But it seems like in this context, forever was 10,000 years. That's what it speaks of specifically in the book. So that's interesting. What were we talking about at the beginning of the podcast that might have happened 10,000 years ago? The Younger Dryas impact theory. The Great Flood could have been around that period of time. So that would have been when he locked away the Nephilim, right? And then 10,000 years pass, and where are we now today? If you don't see these spirits roaming the world, destroying everything they can possibly come in contact with, I don't know what you're looking at, what you're watching. If you watch the world degrade, that's why. I'm giving you the reason why. We're at the time when these spirits are now roaming free again, I think. You know what I mean? That's why the world's gotten backwards. That's why people have gotten into positions of power, right, and been negatively influenced. Doesn't necessarily mean that each individual was bad as they were trying to get where they were going. It means that they were willing to make sacrifices to get where they were going that would degrade them to a level where they wouldn't be savable. The whole plan of these entities is to get you to that point, or to make you think that you're not savable. That's always the point, is to make you think you got to the point where you can't be saved anymore, which isn't the case. From what I understand, the whole significance of Jesus was a relieving of that perpetualness. Jesus was here to combat and to solve that, to forgive that misunderstanding, so that the souls of those who had done wrong, but maybe out of misunderstanding, or maybe out of fear or forgetfulness, or whatever you want to call it, that there was something redeemable like Noah in some of these people, and God wants to conserve that, save that. So he uses Jesus as a figure to do that, so that now we are now living in a different time than is being described in the book of Enoch. I think that if we were if the angels were to grab us up now and take us to the places of the divine, it might not look the same, is what I'm getting. Right? That these places change over time too, and what they look like, what they would look like, what they're made up of, changes over time. Next in the book of Enoch, we're going to move on to page 96 and 97. Where was that at, actually, before I use that? I'll find it later, I guess. I found another interesting passage in the book of Enoch we didn't read, because this is all... The weird thing about the book of Enoch is it's... fragmented because these were Dead Sea Scroll fragments. A lot of these were that they're put together, so you don't have the whole story, which is why it's somewhat frustrating. And they try to put it in like chronological order, but there's a lot of just random passages scattered around, the book. So that looking through the book, I found, just looking for common words like flood or great flood, I ended up coming to the word deluge popped in my head. And I'm like, well, that's a weird way to say flood, but I guess that is flood. And that's the word that they use, is deluge. I found it in the index here. And so this is chapter, what is that? Holy Toledo. Roman numerals are a little confusing if you haven't used it. I think it's 99. Oh, that's interesting. It is. No, 89. Excuse me. So this is section 89, the Book of Enoch the Prophet, line 1 through 9. It's titled The Deluge and the Deliverance of Noah on page 96. And one of those four went to that white bull and instructed him in a secret, without his being terrified. He was born a bull and became a man, and built for himself a great vessel, and dwelt thereon. And 3 bulls dwelt with him in that vessel, and they were covered in. And again I raised mine eyes towards heaven, and saw a lofty roof, with 7 water torrents thereon, and those torrents flowed with much water into an enclosure. And I saw again, and behold, fountains were opened on the surface of that great enclosure, and that water began to swell and rise upon the surface. And I saw that enclosure till all its surface was covered with water. And the water, the darkness, and mist increased upon it. And as I looked at the height of that water had risen above the height of that enclosure, and was streaming over that enclosure, and it stood upon the earth. And all the cattle of that enclosure were gathered together until I saw how they sank, and were swallowed up and perished in the water. But that vessel floated on the water, while all the oxen and elephants and camels and asses sank to the bottom with all the animals, so that I could no longer see them, and they were not able to escape, but perished and sank into the depths. And again I saw in the vision, till those water torrents were removed from the high roof, and the chasms of the earth were leveled up, and other abysses were opened. Then the water began to run down into these, till the earth became visible. But that vessel settled on the earth, and the darkness retired, and light appeared. But that white bull, which had become a man, came out of that vessel, and the 3 bulls with him, and one of those 3 was white like that bull, and one of them was red as blood, and one black. And that white bull departed from them. So I think the bulls are meant to represent the sons, right? Obviously, he had 3 sons, and there's 3 white bulls that exit with him. And he's saying one is a white bull like Noah, one is a black bull, and one is a red bull. And I think what this is meant to represent is the different lineages that break down, right? Because everything spreads from Noah and his sons. So if you think about it in terms of society, those 3 sons go off and make their own societies. And each of them develop independently somewhat of each other. They have their own personalities of sorts that are based off of the personalities of the patriarch, right? And this is where the idea of the Canaanites comes from, and then the other tribes of Israel, right? So this is the origin of that. Anyway, I thought that was an interesting section to read because it's another telling, another way of looking at the story of the flood. That's another version of it throughout history. And so the similarities, what we see in the similarities, we can probably, like I said, as we overlay these Venn diagrams, take as fairly close to true. So that what we're starting to see is there was a flood at some point, right? There was a boat that made it through the flood. There was one man, maybe his family, that were able to survive this flood. Somebody survived. In the Bible, they call it Noah. The figure's been described with other names throughout history, right? But same figure throughout history. So that we can venture to guess that they're most likely, if you look at these as historical documents or texts to any degree, a person who survived a great flood that lived on the earth here. So that if we want to look archaeologically, there should be evidence of that. And there is. Right? It's a better way to go about archaeology. You have source texts. Why don't you go and try to see if what they've already written is true instead of just looking at the rock and trying to suggest what could have happened from nowhere. Right? Without any context. It's kind of crazy when you think about it. The secular perspective is kind of out there. Anyway, moving on. We got a lot of reading today, guys, so I hope you're enjoying this because I got a lot of different texts that just popped out this morning that seemed relevant. So, because we're kind of we're tying up with this episode the flood, right? This is the end of the flood story, and we're getting on to the development of the world the second world. So, and there's another destruction that comes here soon. So we'll read about that in the Tower of Babel. But so God has to do this over and over again. The experiment doesn't work perfectly the first time. But I think that some of the secular perspectives are valuable, and specifically the ones that connect to, not necessarily just secular, but like if we move to the more mythological world, right? Because the secular world likes to play with the myths because they don't seem as real, right? So they'll consider those myths in historical context, even above and beyond religious texts sometimes, because they can always say, well, that's not real. It's just meant to be figurative, right? It's a myth. Whereas if you do that with a religious text, you're going to have to debate the person over whether it's a myth or not, right? So anyway, you get the idea. There's been this modern day myth for at least the modern 20th century, 21st century of Atlantis, right? This fascination with it, this even search in the early 1900s for the lost continent of Atlantis, right? Or city of Atlantis. Famous figures have written about this. We know it's not an old story, a new story, because figures like Plato, one of the original philosopher, right, wrote about the location of Atlantis from what he found at the libraries of Alexandria, if I'm not mistaken. So that it's probably the best tie or real reference from somebody that is more secular that we could go to is Plato's speaking of Atlantis. Now let me bring that up for us real quick. Plato's Atlantis quote. Let's see what we got here. So Plato's Atlantis quote. For it is related in our records how once upon a time your state stayed the course of a mighty host, which, starting from a distant point in the Atlantic Ocean, was insolently advancing to attack the whole of Europe and Asia to boot. For the ocean there was at that time navigable, and there was an island situated in front of the straits, which you Greeks call, as you say, the Pillars of Heracles, which is the Strait of Gibraltar, if I'm not mistaken. The island was larger than Libya and Asia put together, and was the way to other islands. And from these you could pass to the whole of the opposite continent which surrounded the true ocean, for this sea was at that time navigable. This island, which was the way to the others, is said to have been closed off completely by the gods. Wherefore also the sea in those parts is impassable and impenetrable, because there is a shoal of mud in the way. And this was caused by the subsidence of the island. That's the first paragraph where he talks about Atlantis. This is the second one. This power came forth out of the Atlantic Ocean, for in those days the Atlantic was navigable, and there was an island situated in front of the straits, which you Greeks call, as you say, the Pillars of Heracles. The island was larger than Libya and Asia put together, and was the way to other islands. It's just different interpretation, it sounds like. And from these you could pass to the whole of the opposite continent, which surrounded the true ocean. So that is Plato in Timaeus Critias 114c. So that's a long time ago. This is before Jesus. These quotes describe Atlantis as an island larger than Libya and Asia, situated in front of the Pillars of Heracles, modern-day Strait of Gibraltar, and navigable in the past. The island was said to have been destroyed by the gods, causing the sea to become impassable and impenetrable. Please note that these quotes are from Plato's dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, which are the primary sources of the story of Atlantis, right? So there you go. It's kind of why we have, to any degree, a myth of Atlantis anymore is because Plato conserved it after the burning of Alexandria. So let's go on and read from The Secret Teachings of All Ages by Manly P. Hall. This is in chapter 5. Again, I found this kind of looking for different sections on the flood and using those in the index to look for different words, and I ended up coming across a chapter called Atlantis and the Gods of Antiquity. And I want to read, this is going to be a little bit of a read here, guys. It's going to take, let's see. I want to read about 2.5 pages here because it might be, some of it might not be relevant, but it's leading to a section where I think it will be, and it'll talk about Plato as well. All show notes and all sections and everything like that is in the episode description. So if you want to follow along, purchase the books yourself, anything like that, just take a look at the show notes. All right, chapter 5, page 79, Atlantis and the Gods of Antiquity. Atlantis is the subject of a short but important article appearing in the annual report of the Board of Regents of the Smithsonian Institute for the year ending June 30th, 1915. The author M. Pierre Termier, a member of the Academy of Sciences and Director of Service of the Geological Chart of France, in 1912 delivered a lecture on the Atlantean hypothesis before the Institute Oceanographic. It is the translated notes of this remarkable lecture that are published in the Smithsonian Report. So I think that this is actually, if anybody's ever seen Atlantis, the Disney movie, at the very beginning of that movie, I think the figure is maybe the main character, I can't remember his name, Milo? Is it Milo? In Atlantis, he's like this scientist guy that's kind of crazy, and he's giving this big talk on Atlantis and where it is. Also, if you've ever seen Stargate, it's very similar. The movie it's very similar to Atlantis. It starts the same way, but it's just more through the stars and through aliens and that kind of stuff. But in Stargate, the movie starts with him giving a lecture. It looks like at a Smithsonian or something, about his belief that there is, this other civilization, or that the hieroglyphs themselves could be interpreted differently, this kind of stuff. So I think this figure that we're talking about here has actually been represented in a couple different ways in pop culture throughout history, so it's more important and more obscure than we realized. So that would be M. Pierre Termier is the name of that scientist. So he delivered a lecture on the Atlantean hypothesis before the Institute of Oceanographic. It is the translated notes of this remarkable lecture that are published in the Smithsonian Report. Quote, after a long period of disdainful indifference, end quote, writes M. Termier, quote, observe how in the last few years science is returning to the study of Atlantis. How many naturalists, geologists, zoologists, or botanists are asking one another today whether Plato has not transmitted to us with slight amplification a page from the actual history of mankind. No affirmation is yet permissible, but it seems more and more evident that a vast region, continental or made up of great islands, has collapsed west of the pillars of Hercules, sorry, otherwise called the Strait of Gibraltar, and that its collapse occurred in the not far distant past. In any event, the question of Atlantis is placed anew before men of science. And since I do not believe that it can ever be solved without the aid of oceanography, I have thought it natural to discuss it here, in this temple of maritime science, and to call to such a problem long scorned but now being revived, the attention of oceanographers. I just said it earlier. Anyway, as well as the attention of those who, though immersed in the tumult of cities, lend an ear to the distant murmur of the sea. In his lecture, M. Termier presents geographic, and zoological data in substantiation of the Atlantis theory. Figuratively, draining the entire bed of the Atlantic Ocean, he considers the inequalities of its basin and cites locations on a line from the Azores to Iceland, where dredging has brought lava to the surface from a depth of 3,000 meters. The volcanic nature of the islands now existing in the Atlantic Ocean corroborates Plato's statements that the Atlantean continent was destroyed by volcanic cataclysm. M. Termier also advances the conclusion of a young French zoologist, M. Louis Germain, who admitted the existence of an Atlantic continent connected with the Iberian Peninsula and with Mauritania and prolonged towards the south, so as to include some regions of desert climate. M. Termier concludes his lecture with a graphic picture of the engulfment of that continent. The description of the Atlantean civilization given by Plato in the Critias may be summarized as follows. In the first ages, the gods divided the earth among themselves, proportioning it according to their respective dignities. Each became the peculiar deity of its own allotment, and established therein temples to himself, ordained a priestcraft, and instituted a system of sacrifice. To Poseidon was given the sea and the island continent of Atlantis. In the midst of the island was a mountain, which was the dwelling place of 3 earth-born primitive human beings, Evenor, his wife, Leucippe, and their only daughter, Cleito. The maiden was very beautiful, and after the sudden death of her parents, she was wooed by Poseidon, who begat by her 5 pairs of male children. Are you guys putting this together? This is a confirmation. If you're like, their alarm bells are going off in my head right now, but this is right here. This is a confirmation of one of the things we were suggesting last episode, that Paradise Lost is a more accurate telling of what actually happened. It's not a fictional story. So that the fall of the angels, the story in the book of Enoch, and then the development of the first world are all tied together, and that the things that were associated with God or gods, they're describing here is how the world was divided up, that the world was divided up by these different deities who had established different priests for themselves, different sacrifice rituals for only themselves, and different ways to control the society, so that Poseidon was the one of the ocean. And you see these through our myths, right? But that all you have to do is switch that idea of God with fallen angel, and then read the beginning of Paradise Lost, not even very far into Paradise Lost, and you'll see that's exactly what a fallen angel would be doing if it wanted to try to take control or to seek revenge on whatever just cast it out of grace, right? I think this is what happened. I think all of the, and I don't mean to offend anybody if you disagree with me, but this is just what I'm coming to. I believe all the polytheistic gods, the divisions of the gods, are examples of fallen angels who are trying to trick individuals into praying to something that is not God. And they're doing that because they're trying to seek revenge, distance the creator from its favorite creation. It's the only way that they can still fight against the power that cast them out. I think that's the truth. It feels true when I say it. And I hope that doesn't offend anybody. But if it does, know that it's not meant to, and that I'm simply trying to identify why there is differences between the monotheistic and polytheistic versions of religion, and why the polytheistic religion seems to be so focused on sacrifice. External sacrifice, not internal, not conceptually, but on literal sacrifice of physical things, beings. You can look in the Aztec and the Mayan cultures of human sacrifice even sometimes. Things that are quite obviously evil, destructive, horrible, sickening, disgusting, yet for thousands of years were raised as the highest form of worship. What kind of God would want you to do that? A jealous one, right? Which is why God in totality has been confused as a jealous God. Why? Because these fallen angels have been trying to trick you into thinking it is. That's the truth. So it says right here very specifically, there was 3 daughters in the mountain of Atlantis. The most beautiful one, Poseidon fell in love with, and Poseidon goes and sleeps with, and then has how many? 5 pairs of male children. So these would be the Nephilim. The male children, the children of that combination would be the Nephilim, because Poseidon is supposed to be a god. And if we're viewing it properly, Poseidon is a fallen angel. He's one of the watchers that was assigned to watch over creation, and instead of watching over creation, decided to rule over creation. Came down, slept with human women, and through that mixing of the races, created the need for the great catastrophe or flood. I think this is all the same story. I'm almost positive of it at this point now. What are the chances that you'd have that same dynamic happening in 2 different versions of a story that are seemingly unrelated? The maiden was very beautiful, and after the sudden death of her parents, I wonder how they died, she was wooed by Poseidon, who begat by her 5 pairs of male children. Poseidon apportioned his continent among these 10, and Atlas, the eldest, he made overlord of the other 9. Poseidon further called the country Atlantis, and the surrounding sea the Atlantic, in honor of Atlas. Before the birth of his 10 sons. So we still use these words, we don't even know where they come from. Poseidon divided the continent and the coastwise sea into concentric zones of land and water. Do we realize that Atlantic Ocean is meant and it stems from the existence of Atlantis? It's not just like a cool story. It was significant enough that we named an entire ocean after it and conserved that name through almost all of human history. Wow. That might be real then, right?
Poseidon divided the continent and the coastwise sea into concentric zones of land and water, which were as perfect as though turned upon a lathe. 2 zones of land and 3 of water surrounded the central island, which Poseidon caused to be irrigated with 2 springs of water, one warm and the other cold. The descendants of Atlas continued as rulers of Atlantis, and with wise government and industry elevated the country to a position of surpassing dignity. The natural resources of Atlantis were apparently limitless. Precious metals were mined, wild animals domesticated, and perfumes distilled from its fragrant flowers. While enjoying the abundance natural to their semi-tropic location, the Atlanteans employed themselves also in the erection of palaces, temples, and docks. They bridged the zones of sea and later dug a deep canal to connect the outer ocean with the central island. Where stood the palaces and temples of Poseidon, which excelled all other structures in magnificence. A network of bridges and canals were created by the Atlanteans to unite the various parts of their kingdom. Plato then describes the white, black, and red stones. Oh, interesting. What? White, black, and red. What did we just read about in Enoch? White, black, and red. What colors were used for the 3 bulls that came out of the ark in the story of the flood in Enoch? White, black, and red. Right? What? This is blowing my mind. I hope you're enjoying this. Plato then describes the white, black, and red stones, which they quarried from beneath their continent and used in the construction of public buildings and docks. They circumscribed each of the land zones with a wall, the outer wall being covered with brass, the middle with tin, and the inner which encompassed the citadel with orichalc. I don't know how to pronounce it. Orichalc? The citadel on the central island contained the palaces, temples, and other buildings. In its center, surrounded by a wall of gold, was a sanctuary dedicated to the Cleito and Poseidon. Here the first 10 princes of the island were born, and here each year their descendants brought offerings. Poseidon's own temple, its exterior entirely covered with silver and its pinnacles with gold, also stood within the citadel. The interior of the temple was of ivory, gold, silver, and orichalc. I don't know how to pronounce that, orichalc. Even to the pillars and the floor, the temple contained a colossal statue of Poseidon standing in a chariot drawn by 6 winged horses. About him 100 Nereids, riding on dolphins. Arranged outside the building were golden statues of the first 10 knights and their wives. In the groves and gardens were hot and cold springs. There were numerous temples to various deities, places of exercise for men and for beasts, public baths, and a great race course for horses. At various vantage points on the zones were fortifications, and to the great harbor came vessels from every maritime nation. The zones were so thickly populated that the sound of human voices was ever in the air. That part of Atlantis facing the sea was described as lofty, and precipitous. But about the central city was a plain sheltered by mountains renowned for their size, number, and beauty. The plain yielded 2 crops each year. In the winter, being watered by rains, and the summer by immense irrigation canals, which were also used for transportation. The plain was divided into sections, and in time of war each section supplied its quota of fighting men and chariots. The 10 governments differed from each other in details concerning military requirements. Each of the kings of Atlantis had complete control over their kingdom, but their mutual relationships were governed by a code engraved by the first 10 kings on a column of orichalc, standing in the temple of Poseidon. At alternate intervals of 5 and 6 years, a pilgrimage was made to this temple, that equal honor might be conferred upon both the odd and the even numbers. Here, with appropriate sacrifice, each king renewed his oath of loyalty upon the sacred inscription. Here also the kings donned azure robes and sat in judgment. At daybreak they wrote their sentences upon a golden tablet and deposited them with their robes as memorials. The chief laws of the Atlantean kings were that they should not take up arms against each other, and that they should come to the assistance of their members who was attacked. It sounds like NATO. In matters of war, it sounds exactly like NATO. In great moment, the final decision was in the hands of the direct descendants of the family of Atlas. No king had the power of life and death over his kinsmen or kinsmen without the assent of majority of the 10. So there was a democratic principle there as well. Plato concludes his description by declaring that it was this great empire which attacked the Hellenic state. or states. This did not occur, however, until their power and glory had lured the Atlantean kings from the pathway of wisdom and virtue. Filled with false ambition, the rulers of Atlantis determined to conquer the entire world. Zeus, perceiving the wickedness of Atlanteans, gathered the gods into his holy habitation and addressed them. Here Plato's narrative comes to an abrupt end, and the Critias was never finished. And the Timaeus is a further description of Atlantis, supposedly given to Solon by an Egyptian priest, and which concludes as follows. But afterwards there occurred violent earthquakes and floods, and in a single day and night of rain, all your warlike men in a body sank into the earth, and the island of Atlantis in like manner disappeared and was sunk beneath the sea. And that is the reason why the sea in those parts is impassable and impenetrable, because there is such a quantity of shallow mud in the way. This was caused by the subsidence of the island. In the introduction of his translation of the Timaeus, Thomas Taylor quotes from a history of Ethiopia written by Marcellus, which is where they think this might be. It's in Africa. I forget what the name of it is. Before we move on, let me find this because this is important. They do believe that there is a place that could be lost Atlantis. Just recently there was a Rogan episode about it. Atlantis in Africa. I can't remember the name of it, the place. The Eye of the Sahara is the popular name, but it's called the Richat Structure. And the Richat Structure, let's see here. Is a prominent circular geological feature in the Adrar Plateau of the Sahara. It is located near Qadain in the Adrar region of Mauritania. Didn't they mention Mauritania in the reading we just read? In Hassaniya Arabic, Risat means feathers and is also known locally in Arabic as tagaints, referring to the circular opening of the leather pouch that is used to draw water from the local wells. If you want to look this up yourself, the Richat Structure, it's spelled Richat. If you just look on Wikipedia, there's a picture of it. It's insane how closely what looks like a natural geological feature, but most likely isn't, unless there's like some geological development happening that we're not aware of. Excuse me. Could be a possible location for Atlantis. It has the concentric rings, from what I understand, and then in some of the podcasts I've listened to on the Richat Structure, they say that there's buildings as well. Like there's ancient buildings in the internal inside of the circular structure that suggests that there was a civilization that was using this at some point. There's even geological evidence of floods happening. This is one of the areas where you can see the geological evidence of massive floodwaters going all the way from this Richat Structure out to the Atlantic Ocean. So this actually kind of matches well with the description we just read. Anyway, if you're interested in that, please look up the Richat Structure. It's very. I think that might be Atlantis. That's what I'm going to venture a guess. I don't know, but I think the Richat is Atlantis, and I think it's just been, lost over time. For they relate that in their time there were 7 islands in the Atlantic Sea, sacred to Proserpine, and besides these, 3 others of an immense magnitude, one of which was sacred to Pluto, another to Ammon, and another, which is the middle of these, and is of 1,000 stadia, to Neptune. Crantor, commenting upon Plato, asserted that the Egyptian priests declared the story of Atlantis to be written upon pillars, which were still preserved circa 300 BC. Ignatius Donnelly, who gave the subject of Atlantis profound study, believed that horses were first domesticated by the Atlanteans, for which reason they have always been considered peculiarly, that's a hard word, how do you say that word, peculiarly? It's a bad word, sacred to Poseidon. From a careful consideration of Plato's description of Atlantis, it is evident that the story should not be regarded as wholly historical, but rather as both allegorical and historical. Origen, Porphyry, Proclus, Iamblichus and Syrianus realized that the stories concealed a profound philosophical mystery, but they disagreed as to the actual interpretation. Plato's Atlantis symbolizes the threefold nature of both the universe and the human body. The 10 kings of Atlantis are the tetracties, or numbers, which are born as 5 pairs of opposites. So this might be like similar to like the virtues, I'm thinking, and the vices. The numbers 1 to 10 rule every creature, and the numbers in turn are under the control of Monad, or one, the eldest among them. With the trident scepter of Poseidon, these kings held sway over the inhabitants of the 7 small and 3 great islands comprising Atlantis. Philosophically, the 10 islands symbolize the triune powers of the superior deity and the 7 regions who bow before his eternal throne. If Atlantis be considered as the archetypal sphere, then its immersion signifies the descent of rational, organized consciousness into the illusionary, impermanent realm of irrational, mortal ignorance. Both the sinking of Atlantis and the biblical story of the fall of man signify spiritual involution, a prerequisite to conscious evolution. Wow. So that's what I was looking for, and I'm glad we read all of that, because that's the part that I was hoping we'd find. Something that makes it more concise for us. So yes, for those of you who were wondering before, as I was, we are on the right course, because we're putting these pieces together before that's being suggested, right? We're going through these, asking our own questions, seeing if maybe this is right, and as we go and look for more evidence, we're finding that some of those suggestions we've made are being supported, which means we might be onto something here, right? This is how you do research. This is how you find new insight. And I hope that along with just like the religious context of this, the idea that we're going to open ourselves up to new ideas and to really engage with God for an hour and a half or 2 hours, that we're also learning something here that's very practical, right? This isn't just about worship, right? That the highest form of worship actually is you exercising the thing that God gave you, the thing that makes you divine, the Word. And thoughts are the internal version of the Word at play, right? So when you're thinking, that's God, right? When you're speaking, that's God. That's the piece of you that you have, piece of it you have. So, I think, folks, I'm going to leave it there for today, because this one's gone a little bit over. We're over 2 hours into this one, and that's because we had a lot of research to do. And I hope you enjoyed that. A lot of the reading, I hope it wasn't too dull or dry for you at any point, but there is, like you can see, a necessity to get through some of the drier points, because there's kernels in there that are like a key unlocking a door. So now, to summarize everything we've gone through as we finish up the story of the Great Flood, it appears like both the story of the Book of Enoch, which is clarified by the Secret Teachings of All Ages by Manly P. Hall, the story of the fall of the angels, the fall of the Watchers, and the beginning of the first world is the same story as the story of the flood. Right? These are the same stories told from different perspectives at different times. So that the civilization, from what I could put together here, the first civilization that developed, the human beings developed into, was called Atlantis. That was the name of it. We named the Atlantic Ocean based off of it. And that the figures that were worshipped, the polytheistic deities that were worshipped, were fallen angels in disguise. Right? That were jealous of God, and that in some ways the war in heaven that was waged through God's favored creation, through us. So that Poseidon and all of the other pantheon of gods were like I said, fallen angels masquerading, trying to get or trick the human population into worshiping them and forgetting their connection to the real divinity in God. And slowly over time this happened to where there was a necessity for a flood. Right? Because God had watched the world evolve into something that was so disconnected from it that it was no longer creating good. But that there was one figure, one family that had done it right, Noah and his offspring. And he knew that if they had done something right in a world that was fallen, that I have to save that thing. So he uses Noah as the thing that will carry the civilization forward, and he makes a covenant with it, changes the rules somewhat, and says, hey, I think this is how we can fix this from happening again. So he says, eye for an eye, basically. If you kill somebody, you're going to be killed, right? If you hurt somebody, you're going to be hurt. Treat other people like you want to be treated. If you obey those rules, you are protected. That's the covenant initially, right? And then from there, we're going to move on to after the flood, right? God destroyed everything. That's kind of what happened in this section. We saw the figures of the crow and the dove being sent out, and the dove comes back with the olive branch, which is very symbolic, right, of peace. And so we see this kind of abating of the waters in that as well, that the old world was dealt with, and that there was a clearing of the slates, and that Moses and his family repopulated the earth. And that's kind of where we are, is at the beginning of the repopulation. So thank you for joining me here today. Thank you for supporting the podcast up until this point. And please leave a comment, a like, a share, subscribe, especially. It really helps me out, helps the podcast grow. And I will be back on here at the very least next week with another episode of Take Me to Church. And I most likely at some point here in the next couple of weeks, you're going to start seeing regular episodes coming out of the podcast too. I'm taking small bites at a time as I'm expanding here in what I'm doing. So look for that. But with that, that is this episode of the Unfounded podcast. I want to send you a lot of love. Bye-bye.